In a small rural town, Clara Ellison returned to her childhood home after decades away and finally stood before the old tree her mother used to cry under every spring. For years, she never knew why, but when she decided to dig beneath that old tree, Clara uncovered a buried box, a stack of letters, and a truth that would shatter everything she believed about her family. This emotional, true story of a long-lost brother, a mother's silent grief, and a hidden past waiting beneath the roots of an old tree will move you in ways you never expected. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Clara Ellison never quite understood her mother. It wasn't just the usual mysteries like why she always kept the porch light on, even during the brightest summer evenings, or how she folded every towel like it was a sacred ritual. No. What puzzled Clara most was something quieter, something she'd carried with her since childhood. Every April, without a word, her mom would walk barefoot to the sycamore tree that stood behind their farmhouse on the outskirts of Marion County, Kentucky, and cry. She'd sit on the same worn-out stone bench weathered by time, moss creeping up its legs, and just weep, softly, like her heart was breaking, but only just enough to let the pain out in small, silent rivers. Clara remembered asking once, when she was no older than 10, "Mama, why do you cry there every year?" Her mother didn't turn, didn't blink. She just whispered, "Because love leaves roots, and some roots go deeper than memory." Clara didn't ask again. The years moved on, as years do. Her mother grew older. The tree got taller. The crying became softer. And then, finally, it stopped. Because her mother did too, Clara buried her just shy of her 69th birthday under that same tree, per her request. The sycamore stood tall and still, like it was watching over something it could never speak of. A year later, Clara came back. She didn't know why, not really. Maybe it was to feel close again, or maybe the tree had finally decided it was time. It wasn't the wind that stirred her that day. It wasn't even grief. It was a feeling like something under that tree was waiting. Not just a memory, a secret. And Clara was finally ready to dig. Clara didn't bring a shovel. She hadn't planned on digging, or discovering, or doing anything more than sitting quietly on the bench where her mother used to cry. But there she was standing barefoot in the spring soil, wearing one of her mother's old cardigans, staring at the base of that towering sycamore like it might speak to her. It didn't, but the wind shifted. A bird let out a sharp, singular cry overhead, and Clara's eyes fell to something sticking out from under the roots. A corner, just the tiniest edge of something wood, maybe ore-rusted metal. It was too worn to tell, but it was there, poking out from beneath decades of dirt and roots. Her hands moved before she could think. She dropped to her knees and began clawing at the earth, the soil caking under her nails. Each pull sent her heart racing faster. Something was buried here. Not far down, just hidden, just deep enough to keep from sight. Within minutes, she uncovered it. An old, rusted tin box, bent at one corner, the latch nearly dissolved by time and weather. She hesitated. This was her mother's secret. Her pain, her grief. And Clara was about to crack it open. The lid squeaked as she pried it loose. Inside, wrapped in an old linen cloth, yellowed and delicate, were papers. Dozens of them. She lifted the first one. It was a letter, written in her mother's handwriting. "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry I didn't tell you." Clara's hands trembled. There were more. Some folded. some sealed in tiny envelopes with initials she didn't recognize. Some were addressed all to James. James? She didn't know a James. At the bottom of the stack was a photograph curled at the edges, stained with time. It showed a young woman standing under the sycamore, cradling a newborn in her arms. The woman was her mother. Clara had never seen that photo before, and she knew every picture ever taken in that house. Her mother had been meticulous about albums, about what stayed and what was never shown. And then, beneath the photo, a birth certificate. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her mother's name, the father's name was blank, and the child's name in careful, typewritten letters. James Ellison, born April 17th, 1971. 12 years before Clara. She dropped the paper as if it had burned her. A brother. She had a brother. How, why? Why didn't her mother tell her? Clara stumbled backward, landing hard on the bench. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it in her ears. The world seemed to tilt. The tree above her rustled like it knew, like it had always known. She sat there for what felt like hours. The letter clutched in one hand, the photo in the other. Her mother had buried this under the tree, all those years, all those tears. They weren't for something lost. They were for someone. Clara couldn't make sense of it. There had never been talk of another child. No pictures, no stories, no whispers from nosy aunts at family gatherings. Just her, always just her. She rose slowly and picked up the rest of the papers, placing them back in the tin box. She walked back to the house, the old farmhouse that suddenly felt like a stranger's home, and laid everything out on the kitchen table. There, in the afternoon sun, she read every single letter. Some were desperate, some apologetic, some filled with heartbreak. James, I hope you're safe. I hope the family who took you in loved you the way I wanted to. I hope one day, somehow, you find your way back here. I still sit under the tree every year on your birthday. It's where I first held you, and where I last did too. Clara wept, not for herself, but for her mother, for the version of her she never got to know, the one who had made an impossible choice, the one who had carried a loss so deep it had to be buried beneath a tree, the one who had lived with that ache in silence, so that Clara could grow up without knowing what her mother had lost. Clara now knew the truth, but one question still gripped her chest like a vice. Where was James? Clara didn't sleep that night. The farmhouse creaked like it always did, but now every sound felt like a memory waking up. The letters from her mother lay beside her, reread, refolded, wept over. There were no instructions, no clues about where James had gone, only longing and silence. By morning, she'd made up her mind. If her mother had carried this secret for 50 years, then Clara would carry the truth forward. She started with the courthouse in town, birth records, adoption archives, anything from 1971. Nothing? The clerk, a woman with soft eyes and a gentle drawl, leaned over the counter. Sometimes, she said, babies were adopted out privately back then, especially in small towns, churches, families helping families. Not everything made it into the system. Clara left empty-handed, but not defeated. Over the next week, she dug through everything: phone books, school records, even visited the old church her mother used to attend. Everyone remembered her mother. No one remembered James. Until she visited the local post office. There, tucked away behind the counter, was a man named George Whitaker, a retired postman who'd worked the rural route back in the 70s and 80s. When Clara showed him a copy of James's birth certificate and her mother's name, his eyes narrowed. Your mama was Margaret, right, sweet girl? Real quiet. He leaned closer. I remember a family out on the East Ridge, took in a baby around that time, kept to themselves. Real kind people. The father was a carpenter, if I recall right. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a strange mix of dread and hope. "Do you remember their name?" she asked. George squinted toward the ceiling, lips moving as if pulling names from the cobwebs of memory. "Holloway," he said finally. "Nathan and Miriam Holloway." Clara wrote it down with trembling hands. She drove to East Ridge that same day. The Holloway house was still there, a 2-story, white-paneled home with blue shutters and a porch swing that groaned gently in the wind. She knocked. A woman in her 70s answered, her eyes soft but guarded. Clara introduced herself, explained everything. There was a long pause. Then the woman stepped aside. "Come in, honey," she said quietly. "We need to talk." Inside, the air was thick with old wood and older memories. Family photos lined the hallway. Clara scanned them all, looking for him. Miriam Holloway sat down slowly, hands clasped. "Yes, we raised James." She began. "Your mother, she was just a girl, scared, alone, but full of love. She wanted what was best for him, even if it broke her heart." Clara's throat tightened. "Do you know where he is?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Miriam nodded, eyes wet. "He lives in Colorado now, married, 2 daughters, goes by Jamie now." Clara's heart raced. "Can I write to him?" Miriam hesitated. "He doesn't know. About his birth mother, or you." Silence fell between them. "We tried to tell him when he was 18, but he said he didn't want to know. Said the family he had was enough." Clara swallowed hard. The thought of being so close but still out of reach felt unbearable. "But I'll tell you this," Miriam said, her voice trembling. "He's a good man, just like your mama hoped he'd be." Clara left the Holloway house with more answers than she'd dreamed of, and a deeper ache than she expected. She didn't contact Jamie. Not yet. Instead, she drove back to the farmhouse and sat under the sycamore, the same bench, the same breeze, the same stillness. She placed a letter inside the tin box. A new one. "Dear James, my name is Clara Ellison. I'm your sister. I just wanted you to know, Mama never forgot you. Neither will I. This tree holds more than roots. It holds love. And now, it holds you, too." She didn't know if he'd ever read it. Didn't know if he'd ever come back. But she'd be here, waiting. Not with grief, not with tears, but with open arms. Because family isn't just who you grow up with. It's who you carry, even in silence. And Clara was ready to carry him. Clara had always seen her mother as distant. Not cold, exactly. But restrained, like she was always holding something in. A certain sadness behind her smile, a stillness in her laughter. Clara had grown up wondering what she had done wrong, why her mother hugged her gently, but never fully pulled her in, why her lullabies always sounded like apologies, why birthdays felt like rituals she forced herself to celebrate. And now she knew. Her mother hadn't been withholding love. She had been mourning it. The week after meeting Miriam Holloway, Clara couldn't stop thinking about her mother. Every letter, every glance, every quiet moment now made sense, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place after years of confusion. She pulled out old photo albums, flipping through memories that suddenly looked different. In one picture, Clara was 4, sitting on her mom's lap under the sycamore tree, holding a paper airplane. Her mother's eyes weren't on the camera. They were staring at the branches above. Was she thinking of James that day? Of what it felt like to let him go? Clara's throat tightened. She remembered something else, something she hadn't thought about in decades. She was maybe 6, playing in the backyard, when she'd found her mother sitting under the tree, not crying, just holding something in her hands, a small, folded note. When Clara ran up and asked what it was, her mom had smiled, tucked it into her sleeve, and said, "Just something from before you were born. Baby." At the time, Clara didn't think twice. But now, that wasn't a smile of nostalgia. It was a smile of grief wrapped in love, the kind of love that stays silent, because it knows speaking would break everything. Clara stood and walked outside. It was just before sunset. The light stretched long and golden across the field, touching the sycamore like an old friend. She stepped beneath its branches again and sat. This time, she didn't come to dig. She came to listen. And in that silence, something inside her cracked open, not in pain, but in understanding. Her mother had never stopped loving James, but she hadn't loved Clara less because of it. She had simply lived with the weight of both. And somehow, through all of that, she gave Clara the safest life she could. Clara wiped her cheeks and let the moment linger. That night, she found a small cedar box in her mother's closet, the one she used to think was for keepsakes. But when she opened it, nestled among old church bulletins and pressed flowers, was a stack of unsent letters addressed to James. One for every birthday. Clara read them all. "You'd be 16 today. I wonder if you drive like your father did, reckless and brave. I hope your heart is softer than the world around you. You'd be 30 now. I saw someone in the market with your eyes. I almost called out. Almost. You're 40 today. I hope someone is singing to you. I hope you're loved." Every line was a confession, a prayer, a quiet scream written in ink. Clara held the last letter to her chest and whispered, "She never forgot you, Jamie." The next morning, Clara did something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She made pancakes her mom's recipe, the one with buttermilk and a touch of vanilla. She set the table for 2. 1 plate for herself, 1 for her mother. And she whispered, "I forgive you." Not because her mother needed forgiveness, but because Clara needed to let go of the years she'd spent misunderstanding a love that had simply taken a different shape. In the days that followed, she wrote her own letter this time, not to James, but to her future children. She didn't have them yet, but she knew they'd come. And one day, when they asked about the tree out back, she'd tell them, not just about the loss, but about the strength of a woman who loved so deeply. She gave everything without asking for anything back. She'd tell them, some trees don't just grow leaves, they grow legacy. And Clara was ready to pass that on. A week later, Clara stood in front of the tree again. But this time, she wasn't crying. She was holding a hammer and a small wooden sign she had carved herself, just like her father used to teach her on warm spring afternoons. The wood still smelled fresh. The letters, though a little shaky, were carved with steady care. The Ellison tree, where roots remember. She nailed it gently into the trunk, not deep enough to hurt the tree, but just enough to mark the space that had quietly carried generations of love, pain, and memory. Then she stepped back. This wasn't just where her mother had mourned her first child. It was where Clara had found her truth. And she wasn't going to let that truth stay buried any longer. That night, she called the local library. She asked about reserving a small room, not for a meeting or an event, but for something a bit more personal. "I want to start a memory circle," she explained to the librarian, a woman named Carol who'd known her mother from church, for people who've lost family, especially the ones they never got to know. There was a long pause on the line. "You're Margaret's girl." "Right," Carol said. She used to sit in the library for hours, always reading the same shelf. Clara smiled. "Yeah, that was her." "Well," Carol continued, "I think she'd be proud of what you're doing." 2 weeks later, 6 strangers gathered in that tiny library room. An older man who lost a sister at birth and never knew her name. A woman who gave up a child when she was 16. A quiet teenager who had just learned he was adopted. A mother, a son, a cousin. And Clara sitting in a circle of folded chairs, holding nothing but a notebook and a heart wide open. No one spoke at first, but when Clara shared her story about the sycamore tree, the letters, the hidden brother, something changed in the room. Eyes welled up, chests softened, walls fell. Because the truth is, we all carry a silence. Some are heavy, some are fragile, and some, like Clara's, are waiting for someone brave enough to speak them into the light. That small group grew. Soon, more people came from neighboring towns, churches, even as far as Louisville. Clara called it the Quiet Tree Project, a space for sharing the stories we were told not to speak of. They planted trees together. Every story told was honored by planting a seedling, somewhere a symbolic gesture that even the things we bury can bloom again. Clara's own backyard became a grove. Each tree bore a name. Each root held a memory. And Clara, once the girl who never understood her mother's tears, had become the keeper of tears for others. One afternoon, as Clara was packing up letters for a local event, she found an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was of a man late 40s, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes. He was standing with 2 young girls. One of them held a paper airplane. The other wore a cardigan that looked too big for her. On the back, in handwriting that wasn't hers but somehow felt familiar, were 3 words. "I found it. Jamie." Clara sank to the porch steps. The photo pressed against her heart. He knew. Maybe he wasn't ready to meet. Maybe he never would be. But he knew. And that was enough. That evening, she wrote in her journal, "I used to think loss was about absence. But now I know. Loss is where new beginnings hide, waiting to be found. My mother carried her grief in silence. I carry mine by planting it in the light." The wind rustled through the trees in the backyard, and she imagined, for a moment, that it was her mother's voice. Not crying, just whispering. "You found him." Clara sat at the kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee cooling beside her, the photo of Jamie and his daughters laid out in front of her like something sacred. She stared at the handwriting. "I found it." He hadn't left a phone number. No address. Just those words. And the picture? It could have meant anything. Or it could have meant everything. She turned the photo over again and again, memorizing every wrinkle near his eyes, every dimple in the cheeks of the little girl holding the paper airplane. 1,000 questions buzzed in her chest. Did he remember her name? Did he know how long their mother wept for him? Did he keep that letter she buried under the sycamore? But Clara didn't write back. Not yet. Weeks passed. Spring turned to summer. The trees in her backyard were fuller now, like they'd settled into their new purpose. Each carried a name of someone lost, someone found, or someone finally remembered. One day, during a quiet tree gathering, a woman named Lorraine shared that she hadn't spoken to her father in 25 years, not since he told her she wasn't the daughter he wanted. She sobbed as she planted her tree. Clara hugged her tightly, whispering, "You deserved to be loved loudly." Later that evening, alone, Clara sat under the Ellison tree and cried for someone else. For Lorraine. For her mother. And for herself, the child who used to think her mother's distance meant rejection, when it had actually been protection. That night, Clara did something she hadn't dared do since she found Jamie's photo. She wrote to him, "Dear Jamie, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe your daughters will. Maybe you'll tuck it away in a drawer, like the ones Mama wrote to you for years. but I wanted to say thank you for finding it, for letting me know you saw it. I don't need more than that. I don't need an answer. But if your heart ever wonders, yes, she loved you, always. And I do too. Even if we never meet, I'll be here under this tree she cried under every spring. And if one day you find yourself on this porch, there will be coffee waiting, and maybe pancakes if I'm feeling brave. Love, Clara. She placed the letter in a small wooden box and left it on the bench beneath the sycamore, next to the tin box her mother once buried. Then she lit a lantern and hung it on the branch above just in case. Just in case someone ever came looking. A month passed, then 2. Clara stopped checking the bench obsessively. She didn't want hope to turn into disappointment. But one early October morning, she walked outside with a blanket and a book and stopped cold. The letter was gone, and in its place was a new one. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The envelope was plain. Inside, a single sheet of paper, written in a hand she didn't recognize, but somehow knew. You made pancakes. Tears spilled instantly. That's all it said. You made pancakes. No name, no explanation. But it was him. She laughed through the sobs. Her knees gave out as she sank onto the bench, letter clutched to her chest. That moment small, quiet, barely a whisper was everything. It wasn't just a reply. It was a reconciliation with someone she never thought she'd touch. It was the silent beginning of a bond that had waited nearly 5 decades to form. In the weeks that followed, more letters came. Sometimes from him, sometimes from his daughters. Simple things, questions about the farm, stories about their dog, a drawing of the tree with a heart in the middle. Clara replied to every single one. She didn't ask for more, didn't beg to meet. She just showed up with stories, with laughter, and sometimes with silence. Because sometimes being present is louder than any reunion. One evening, just before winter set in, Clara received a final envelope. Inside was a photograph. Jamie, standing under the sycamore. No words, no note. Just a man finally standing in the shadow of his beginnings. She pressed her fingers to the photo and whispered, "Welcome home." That night, for the first time since her mother passed, Clara slept with the window open, and the wind through the trees sounded just like forgiveness. The first snowfall came early that year. It dusted the tops of the sycamore's branches like powdered sugar, painting the wooden sign Clara had carved months ago. The Ellison tree, where roots remember, in soft white. Clara stood at the kitchen window, mug of tea in hand, watching the flakes dance across the yard. The world felt quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This quiet was full of names spoken and secrets unearthed, full of healing, full of presence. In the months that followed Jamie's silent visit, something shifted in Clara. She no longer lived waiting for letters. She lived preparing for what they represented, the possibility of showing up for others. She expanded the Quiet Tree Project to surrounding counties. What began as 6 strangers in a library became nearly 100 people, gathering every season telling stories once buried, writing letters never sent, and planting trees in honor of people the world had forgotten. Some came to speak about fathers they never met, others about children they gave up but never stopped loving. Some just needed a place to say the name of someone who had died too soon and not feel like they had to apologize for still missing them. Clara remembered all their names. She remembered every tree. And under the sycamore, she kept the lantern lit, a symbol that no one is ever truly lost, not if we're willing to carry their light forward. Then, one spring morning, it happened. A truck pulled up the gravel road. Slow, hesitant. Clara had been weeding the garden, hands dirty and heart quiet, when the door creaked open, and he stepped out. "Jamie?" No letters this time, No photographs, just him older than she imagined, but still bearing the same eyes their mother had. He said nothing at first, just looked around, at the house, the porch, the tree, then finally at Clara. She didn't rush toward him. She didn't need to. She only smiled, whispered, "Hey," and motioned toward the porch. "You hungry?" she asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I make a mean pancake on Saturdays." He laughed softly, and it was the same laugh she remembered from the letters. They sat, quietly. No tears, no grand reunion speeches. Just pancakes, just presents, just enough. Later, he stood beneath the sycamore, running his hand over the sign. "She never stopped coming here, did she?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Not once." Jamie knelt and touched the roots. He didn't say anything for a while. Then softly, "I never blamed her. You know." Clara felt her throat tighten. "She thought you would." Jamie looked up at the branches above. "I think... part of me always hoped she'd be under this tree, that one day I'd come back and someone would be waiting." He turned to her. "Thank you for being that someone." That summer, Jamie brought his daughters. They played in the field Clara once ran through barefoot as a girl. They picked dandelions and drew hearts in the dirt. They asked about the trees. Why are there so many? Aunt Clara. And Clara smiled. "Because people remember here," she said, "even the ones they never got to meet." Eventually, Jamie began helping with the quiet tree events. He built benches, crafted name plaques, told his story slowly, gently to others who needed to know that even broken beginnings can lead to beautiful middles. And Clara, she just kept planting, kept holding space, kept living a life her mother never had the chance to, one where silence didn't win. Years later, when a reporter came to write about the Quiet Tree Project, she asked Clara a simple question. "What made you start all this?" Clara looked out toward the sycamore, now taller than ever. Standing over a grove of trees, each planted in honor of a story once hidden. And she answered, "Because my mother cried under that tree for 40 years, and I decided it was time someone laughed beneath it again." As the sun dipped behind the hills that day, Clara lit the lantern on the sycamore one more time. Not for herself, not even for Jamie, but for the next person who would walk down that gravel road, carrying a silence in their chest, looking for a place to leave it, and find love instead. Anyone can heal if they're brave enough to ask the questions, and gentle enough to sit with the answers. As the last light of day filtered through the sycamore leaves, Clara Ellison placed one final letter beneath the tree, not for her brother, not for her mother, but for the next soul searching for a piece of themselves they thought was lost. Because Clara knew now this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every daughter who wondered why their mother cried, every child who was never named out loud, and every person who's ever carried a silence too heavy for one heart alone. The woman who once thought grief was something to hide had become the keeper of roots, memory, and second chances. Because for Clara and for those who come after, the truth doesn't bury us. It plants us. And from there, we grow. The end? Up next. 2 more unforgettable stories that will leave you breathless. Click to keep the light going, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe stories can heal more than just hearts. They can heal families.